So chapter 11 deals with just the office of presidency. Okay, it's called America's Highest Office, the Presidency. What we're going to be looking at are the president's responsibilities, what the Constitution restricts him to do, the duties of the vice president, and we're going to talk briefly about the executive branch. So let's begin with the presidential powers. Article 2 of the Constitution outlines just the duties of the president. So specifically the duties of the president, you need to know that Article 2 of the Constitution outlines that the president is the chief executive and must administer and enforce laws through the various departments under his control. And as the chief executive, he also administers a vast bureaucracy, meaning that he is over many different departments, and that is a very vast. Okay, so make sure that you know that his duties come from Section 2 of the Constitution. Make sure that you know that he's the chief executive and has to administer and enforce laws, and he also administers the vast bureaucracy. Let's take a look at the presidential salary. It has been $200,000 since 1969. However, President Clinton gave himself and the future presidents to come a raise to $400,000. In addition to his annual salary, he receives free housing at the White House, $50,000 that's allotted for his expenses, $19,000 for entertainment if he wants to go to the movies, bowling, etc., $100,000 for travel, medical, and dental, $199,700 for a lifetime pension, $150,000 to maintain staff after retirement. So yearly, the president receives about $918,000. Well, let's not forget about the 700. That is a true-false question. They're going to ask you if he earns, I think it's either 200 or 300,000 a year, and we know that he makes more than that. Right now, his salary is at 400,000. All right, now we're going to talk about how the president travels. As far as these are concerned, guys, you just have to know what method of transportation it is and what it's called. All right, so we're starting off with Air Force One. You need to know that Air Force One is the presidential jet, and that's it. The rest of this information I just like to tell you. It came from President Roosevelt, who wanted a basically flying office because they travel a lot. Today, the Air Force One fleet has two 747 B aircraft that can hold a little more than 70 passengers and fly halfway around the world without refueling. The base for Air Force One is in Maryland at Andrews Air Force Base. Okay, and they're only flown by members of the Air Force. So you need to know that Air Force One is the presidential jet. This is what it looks like in the inside. As you can see, office. There's even a kitchen, a small kitchen where they cook and prepare food for the president. So if you wanted to take a more in-depth look at this, feel free to pause the video here. Next, we have Marine One, which is also a presidential aircraft. You need to know that Marine One is a helicopter. It's also flown by pilots, but these pilots are not in the Air Force. These pilots are Marines. It's called Marine One. So it's flown by a special group of pilots in the Marine Squadron of HMX, and it has been done that way since 1957. Another method of presidential travel that I don't have pictured here that you need to know for testing purposes is called the Ferdinand Magellan. Ferdinand Magellan. And this is the presidential railroad car. It's hardly ever used, but it's there. So the three methods of travel that you need to know is Air Force One, which is the presidential jet, Marine One, which is the presidential helicopter, and Ferdinand Magellan, which is the presidential railroad car. So make sure you know that for testing purposes. All right, so the presidential residence is called the White House. The thing that you need to know here is the fact that the White House employs at least 400 people. So there are at least 400 or more people on staff. It consists of 3 floors and a whole bunch of rooms. So if you guys want to look at this a little bit more in detail, feel free to pause the video here and look at the photos and read the description. Next, we're going to talk about the presidential powers, the things that the president is responsible for. And in each slide, we're going to go into these things a little bit more in detail. However, I will let you guys know specifically what you need to know for testing purposes. So the listed presidential powers is he's commander-in-chief, he's a diplomatic leader, he's a legislative leader, the chief of state, and a party leader. So beginning with commander-in-chief, you need to know that the president is commander-in-chief over the United States military, and he can use his power to respond quickly in the case of emergency, which he did in the case of 9/11. So know that the president is the commander-in-chief over the United States military. You also need to know for testing purposes that he carries out covert operations that are unknown to the public. That's what they mean by covert. They're unknown to the public, undercover, and sometimes Congress doesn't even know. But testing purposes over the United States military uses his power to carry out covert operations, like the one that Barack Obama did when he got and assassinated bin Laden. It's also important to mention that the Reagan administration took part in covert operations in Afghanistan, Nicaragua, and Angola. You need to know that for testing purposes as well. Moving on to the president being a diplomatic leader. He shall also have the power to make treaties, appoint ambassadors, and other public ministers and counsel. So for that particular part, it is very important to know that the president shares a lot of foreign responsibilities with Congress here. An executive agreement, you need to know that for testing purposes, is a written understanding of another head of state to carry out a particular action. You also need to know for testing purposes that Congress has little to no power over executive agreements. It's something that the president does in issues that they cannot control. All right, the president also has power as a legislative leader. This has grown in the 20th century, his influence, especially over Congress, because it used to be that the president could suggest things to Congress, but they could decide whether they wanted to agree with him or not. This is a test question. Presidents generally have more difficult time getting desired legislation, meaning getting the bills that they want passed through Congress during their second term than during their first term. Because at that point, for different reasons, Congress wants to change things around because they believe that, okay, we're going to be with you on the first term. We're going to try everything you want. But during the second term, this is not really working. So they tend not to agree with him as much. Also, you need to know for testing that the president is required by the Constitution to give Congress information from time to time about the State of the Union. And this is called the State of the Union Address. And this is televised and watched by many of the American people. The last thing that we're going to talk about in this particular video is the president's job as Chief of State. And what you need to know here is that the president is a national leader, and he's a symbol. For the most part, when something goes wrong, something is tragic, something happens well, people look to the president. We have a strong identification with him. We want to hear him speak. We want to hear what he's going to say to either ease our pain or make us feel happy. So he's a very big part of us. All right. And that concludes this particular video. Pop quiz. Question 1. True or false? The president earns $300,000 a year. Question 2. Covert operations are unknown to the general public and are often unknown to Congress. True or false? Question 3. What is the primary duty of the president? Question 4. What is the name of the presidential jet? And question 5. True or false? The White House employs at least 400 people. Remember, guys, take note. And if you need to rewind any portions of this video, please do so.